And tonight we are going to talk about vermicomposting and how it works. We'll talk about what you need to consider as you are getting started, how to care for your worms, what to do if something goes wrong. And at the end of it, because we're planning for everything to go right, what to do with your wonderful worm castings. So first things first, what is composting? Well, it's composting with worms. Um, I'll start by saying composting, if you are very new to composting, this is the process of recycling organic matter into a soil-like product that's nutrient rich. It's dark, it's crumbly, it's earthy smelling, and it's something that you can add to your soil to help with its texture and help make it healthier for the plants that you grow in it. So, this process of decomposition happens naturally, out in forests. Leaves fall and they decompose into the soil. So, composting is when humans get involved and they intentionally make this process happen in more of a controlled environment. Um, and so vermicomposting is using worms to do that. Some of you might be familiar with your standard outdoor composting, where you take your kitchen scraps and maybe your yard waste and you put it in a pile or a bin outside to compost. That uses fungi and microbes and some bugs. And both of these methods are a good alternative to putting your food waste in the trash, where it ultimately ends up in a landfill. And when your food is decomposing in the landfill, it creates methane, it creates leachate, which is this stinky, slimy substance, which is can be a pollutant. And then of course the methane can contribute to global warming. So we want to be using as many methods as we can to try to reduce that process. And so both outdoor composting and this indoor vermicomposting are good options for that. So vermicomposting is taking your food scraps and you will put them in a special bin where special worms live. And those worms, all they want to do all day is eat, reproduce, and poop all day, every day. So we want to set them up so that they're happy and that they can do that um, for as many days as possible. We want to get castings from them, which is glorified worm poop. So worms eat this organic matter and poop it out, resulting in these castings. And when I say organic matter, no, that is not just vegetables that were grown at a certified organic farm. Organic matter in this context is anything that was alive at some point or came from something that's alive. So this is plants, our vegetable scraps, our eggshells, our fallen brown leaves outside, even paper and cardboard, because those come from plants. So this is what I mean when I say organic matter here. Worms eat that and then poop it out, resulting in worm castings. And some people call these worm castings black gold because they're so valuable as a soil amendment. So the special bins that these worms will live in, I have a couple examples of what they look like here. This one on the left, the blue one, is a very standard, basic do-it-yourself bin. Um, it's something that can be made if you have any of these totes lying around your house not being used, um, and can be fairly inexpensive and simple to set up. Um, on the right is another common worm tower, which a lot of people like to use. They can come in a few different sizes, ranging from something that could sit on your countertop to something that is about as big as like an end table. And these are nice because they have different layers that you can put your bedding and your food scraps. And as you as you move the food from the different trays, the worms move up and leave their castings behind. So it's very easy to harvest the castings from these worm towers. However, it is something that you have to purchase. And so these worm towers, along with a couple of the other vermicomposting options, like some countertop systems, or there are also these larger worm bags that you can purchase. They can be a little trickier to use and they can be more expensive. So I'm going to be talking mostly about these DIY bins today. And if this ends up being something that you are very interested in and you want to move on to something a little bit fancier, by all means, you can look into some of these other options. Now, the worms that you will want to use, you can't just use any worm. There are over 7,000 species of earthworms out there, and some of them are better at composting than others. So I have our friend here on the right, Isenia fetida, also known as the red wiggler. These are ideal for vermicomposting. They are surface dwellers. So if you think about the size of those bins that I just showed you, they're pretty shallow. So they only have a few inches of bedding in there for the worms to live in, as opposed to these worms on the left, Lumbricus terrestris, common earthworm. These are burrowers, so they like to dig down deep into the soil. They will not be happy in a shallow bin that we're keeping on our countertops. They want to be living deep in the soil outside. Um, Another thing about the red wigglers is that they eat decaying organic matter. So that's exactly what we want. We want the worms to be eating the food waste that we're feeding them. These red wigglers are voracious eaters. They love to eat kitchen scraps, and they can eat up to their weight in food every day. And some of these bins can have over 1,000 worms in them. So that adds up to a lot of food. Now, on the other hand, the common earthworm on the left here, their favorite food is soil. So they're actually eating the soil outside and they're using the nutrients in that soil. So they can get a lot bigger than the red wigglers, and their castings, their poop, is going to have less nutrients in it than the red wigglers will. So when you are shopping for worms, um, I would recommend not going out and just digging up any old worm that you can find in your backyard. Um, it's worth the effort of seeking out these red wigglers because they are the hungry ones that will make the best castings. And by looking at these worms, it's kind of, I mean, you can kind of tell that the pointy part is their front. But how do they eat? Well, here is a nice diagram of their insides. They do have a mouth, but there's a couple things that are missing from here that you might expect. They don't have eyes, they don't have a nose. Obviously, they don't have arms or legs like we do, but they do have very sensitive skin, and their skin can sense light. They can sense when there's food around. So the worm, its skin senses when there is food, and these bristles along the body um, are what help the worm move over to where the food is. And then the pharynx sucks the food into the worm's digestive tract, where it ultimately ends up in the gizzard. And that word gizzard is probably familiar to you. There are many other animals that have gizzards, including chickens. And if you know anything about how chickens eat, they need grit in their diet to be able to digest the food that they eat. That grit helps break down the food into smaller particles so that it can then pass through the rest of their digestive system. So same thing with worms. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but they do need grit to be mixed in with their bedding or their food to help them digest what we feed them. And then also another important part of their anatomy is this clitellum, and that is that band around their bodies about a third of the way from their front. Um, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So when you have your worms in their nice bin homes, you want to take care to make sure that they stay healthy. And the big concern is their skin. So because they use it for so much, they breathe their oxygen in and carbon dioxide out from their skin. They prefer temperatures between about 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, just like me. And they also need to stay moist and warm so that their skin can keep doing those important functions for them, as well as keep their bristles that setae on their skin, which helps them move around and cling to surfaces. Now, as I had mentioned, there can be around 1,000 or more worms in each bin, and the lifespan of these worms is about a year. When I was putting this presentation together, I came across a few numbers up to like 4 years, but really you can expect them to live about a year. But what that means is if you want to be vermicomposting and having these worms around long term and creating lots and lots of worm castings for your garden, how do you keep their population up? Well, this is how they reproduce. So all worms have both male and female reproductive organs, but you still need two of them to make more worms. So they do that by lining up their clitellum, which is that thickened band around their bodies, and they exchange reproductive cells from their clitellums. Then later, they shed off that part of their body and create a cocoon, which usually has about 5 baby worms in it. And that hatches in about 30 days. So, if there's 1,000 worms in there, you might be thinking, wow, they must reproduce like crazy. And am I going to end up with 1,000,000 worms? No, the size of your bin and the amount of food in there will help keep the population in check. So they'll kind of self-regulate. And you shouldn't be finding dead worms in there because they decompose pretty quickly. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a little bit. And then the last thing to consider, not the last, but one more thing to consider is where to keep your worm bin. So obviously somewhere warm and somewhere convenient. For example, under your sink, like that example in that picture on the left. If the bin is in your kitchen, under the sink is generally a pretty warm spot, and it's right where you're in your kitchen chopping your vegetables anyway. You can just stick the scraps right in the bin when you're done chopping. You can also, maybe you don't have room under your sink, you can get a bin that is one of these cute aesthetic bins and just keep it out in the open as part of your decor. Those are nice. Somewhere nearby where you're going to remember to use it. I do have an example of one outside there in the middle. Um, the one downside to keeping the bins outside is that here in New Jersey, we have hot summers and we have cold winters, and the worms like that sweet spot of 60 to 80 degrees. So they'll want to be inside in the AC when it's in the middle of summer, and they'll want to be nice and cozy in your house in the winter. So, and then also, and something else is that if it's outside, you might be less likely to be feeding them and checking on them. So if that's your only option, go for it and try it, but it's just something to be cautious of, and bring it in during those extreme temperatures. Now, when you are assembling your bin, you have to think about what size bin is right for you. I like to think about this ratio of 1 to 1 to 1. So 1 cubic space is a good size for 1 pound of worms, and then those worms eat 1 pound of food per week. So given that the average family of about 2 to 3 people produces 2 pounds of food waste per week, that means 2 cubic feet is the right amount of space. And then to give you an idea of that size, a 12-gallon tote is about 2 cubic feet. And that's the size that I use to make this bin that I'm going to show you right now. It's like your standard shallow tote bin. So these are just ones that I found in the office. They did have some holes in them already up top, but just to get started, you can use what you have if you have some bins laying around at home, or you can go out and purchase the size bin. This is a good size to start, in my opinion. You need 2 bins and 1 lid because they're going to nest inside each other. You will drill some holes along the upper edge of one of the bins and in the bottom of the bin where water may kind of settle and pool. And you can use a drill bit that's 1/8 or a 1/4 inch. That's a good size. It's not too big that the worms will kind of fall out of them, or their food might fall out if they're bigger than that. In this picture, I think that these holes up towards the edge are a little bit big, but like I said, I found these bins in my office and those holes were already there. But they'll do the job. I definitely wouldn't go any bigger than that. But those holes up top are important for airflow, and the holes on the bottom are important for drainage. And then, like you can see here, the bin with the holes in it nests inside the bin that doesn't have any holes in it, and then the lid goes on top of the 2 of them. And then here's what goes inside of those bins. So the worms need some bedding to live in and burrow in. They like about 3 inches of shredded newspaper or cardboard. Some people will also use cocoa core, which is shredded up coconut husk. And you can buy that online. You can buy it at some pet stores. It usually comes compressed in a block that you put in a bucket and hydrate with water, and it expands to this nice fluffy material. It's nice, but you don't need it. Cardboard or newspaper would be fine. And then you would also add your finely crushed eggshells, or you can also use sand, and that's that grit that the worms need to help them digest their food. And of course, obviously, you're going to need your worms, and you can buy them online. You can just search red wigglers, and there are plenty of places where you can buy these worms. And if you want to avoid buying online, you can try if you have a local tackle store nearby or a local pet shop, sometimes they will have the red wigglers. Your best bet is probably just to order them on the internet. They will come either in the mail to your home or to the post office, and then you'll go and pick up your bag of worms from the post office. But they come in a bag like this with some like I think it's peat moss or some kind of substrate to keep them nice and happy and cozy while they are being shipped. But they do come in kind of a ball, so you'll want to have your bin and bedding prepared um, for when your worms arrive, so you can just put them straight into their new home. And they'll, like I said, they'll be in kind of a ball, but then once you put them in the bin, you'll see them fairly quickly burrow down because they prefer a dark environment. So they'll make their way down into the bedding. Some optional supplies that you might want, but they're not required. The cocoa core that I mentioned is nice for bedding. Some of these worm suppliers sell a worm blanket that you can just lay on top of the bedding to keep them nice and dark and cozy. You can also get a thermometer just to help you monitor the temperature and make sure that the worms are staying in that sweet spot of 60 to 80 degrees. And then I also like to keep a spray bottle handy to moisten if things are looking a little dry. So once you get your worms all settled into their new home, you'll also have to feed them. And you can feed them about once a week. Um, the 1 pound of worms is a good place to start when you're ordering your worms. They'll reproduce fairly quickly if you have more space and good food for them. So um, I would start by feeding 1 pound a week, and you can kind of check and monitor each week as you're putting the food in. Did they eat everything that you gave them? Is there a lot left? Is it really wet in there? Just be observant during your feeding time is a good time to kind of monitor what's going on in the bin. So, um, as far as what they eat, you have to remember they have no teeth. So they prefer soft, mushy food. You can cut up larger pieces, so maybe an apple core, or in this picture, it's a good example of watermelon rind. You would want to cut that up into small pieces just to make it easier for them to eat. You can also freeze your scraps, which is a good way to store them in each week, in between feedings. But also the freezing helps break down some of the cell walls of the vegetables and makes it mushier and easier for the worms to digest. Um, as far as what you can put in the bin, the standard rules of composting, outdoor composting, kind of also apply here. You want your greens, which generally are nitrogen-rich ingredients, and you want your browns, which are your carbon-rich ingredients. In this case, for the worms, the greens tend to be food, and the browns tend to be bedding. Although you'll find that they do eat everything. They will eat the bedding, and you have to replace that periodically as well. And so when you're doing your feedings, you should be adding both. And the amount that you add depends on what is left in there from the previous week. Generally, the amount of browns that you add should be much higher than the amount of greens that you add. So you might be adding just a little cup full of your kitchen scraps, but you'll want to add a big handful or two of more bedding. So again, that's your shredded paper, shredded cardboard, or the coconut coir. They love to eat kitchen scraps. I can't say that enough. They really like, especially fruit and soft, sweet things like melon and banana. They tend to really like avocado. And you can also put in tea bags as long as you remove those staples, your coffee grounds, and of course the bedding ingredients that I had mentioned just before. And you should definitely avoid these things here on the right. Technically, you can put bread in the worm bin, but I would definitely say do that sparingly because bread can mold pretty quickly and create some other problems in the bin that you want to avoid. Um, as far as citrus goes, if you have ever been cutting a lemon and gotten a spritz in your eye or lemon juice in a cut, you know how badly that can sting because of the acidity in the citrus. And when we think about how sensitive the worm's skin is and how important that is for everything that they do, we want to be protecting their skin and not hurting them. So avoid the citrus. Same thing with the onions and garlic. They can also irritate the worm's skin, and we want to keep them happy so that they keep eating our food scraps. So just don't, just avoid putting them in there. You can put that stuff in your trash or your regular compost. Definitely never put meat or dairy or anything that's super greasy or processed in the bin. And this is because the worms don't love that food. They won't eat it quickly. It's not easy for them to digest, and it'll just sit in the bin and rot and be very smelly and gross. Just don't do it. So, once everything goes right, you will end up with castings. And this is your worm poop. This is roughly how it will look when it's ready. It looks like soil. It looks kind of like dirt, but it's very dark. It's very crumbly, and once you get used to seeing your worm's environment, it looks very different, right, from the paper and the cardboard that was in there originally. So this is how you know it's ready to harvest. And there's a couple different ways to do that. There is this easy way, but it does take about a month or so. So what you do is you can see step one is just your bin full of your worm castings. You want to scooch over that pile, kind of pile it up on one side of the bin, and then put new bedding and some food in that new empty space on the right side. And then eventually the worms will sense that there's a nice new food over on the right side. They will travel out of the pile of castings and into the nice new pile of bedding. And then you can go in and scoop out the castings. Now, like I said, this can take about a month. So if you are in a hurry to use your castings, you can do this other method that does take a little bit longer. You can lay out a tarp or some newspaper and shine a bright light on it. Then you'll dump the castings out onto the tarp or the newspaper and separate them out into these little cones or pyramids. And so the worms are very sensitive to light. They want to stay somewhere that's dark and cozy. So they will move from the top of the piles down into the bottom of the piles after a few minutes, half an hour. Um, and then you can just kind of scoop up that top part of each little pyramid and save those castings, put them aside. And then you'll be left with a little pile of worms at the bottom of each pile, and then you can just put those back into the bin. So this is faster than the other method, but it does require a little bit more work, a little bit more getting up close and personal with the worms. So do whatever you have the energy for. They will be ready about once or twice a year. You'll be able to harvest your worm castings. And once you've harvested them, now's the best part. You get to use them. You get to add some nutrients to your soil. So if you are up potting your houseplants, or if you are out planting some new plants in the garden, you can dig your hole for your new plant, throw some worm castings into the hole, and then stick your plant in there. You can also mix some of the worm castings into the top layer of soil in your potted plants. If you don't have a garden or if you don't own any house plants, you can give some as a gift. You can sprinkle some around your street trees on your block, or you can donate it to a community garden in your area. Now, of course, I hope everything goes very well for you, but sometimes things go wrong, especially if you are new to this and still getting used to the routine of it. So I have some troubleshooting steps. So first, if your bin is stinky or if it's attracting some flies, probably the problem is that you are adding too much food at a time or feeding too frequently. Um, it could be too wet in the bin, and not enough airflow. So these are things that you should be looking for, kind of noticing as you're doing your feedings every week. And to fix it, you can just stop feeding for 2 weeks to let the worms eat the food that's already in there before you add more. You can, if it's too wet in there, maybe you're not seeing a lot of extra food in there, but it's just very wet. You can mix in some dry bedding and kind of fluff it up to aerate it and help dry it out and absorb some of that moisture. Another problem that could happen is moisture itself. So maybe it's really dry in there. Or the opposite problem, it's way too wet and there's a lot of water kind of draining out and collecting in the bottom. So depending on what's happening, if it's too dry, there's probably too much ventilation in there. And if it's too wet, there's either not enough ventilation or the food that you're adding is too wet. So again, if you're dry, you can add some moist bedding, you add some moisture. Um, I'm sorry, there's a little typo here. If it's too wet, that is when you would want to mix in your dry bedding. And you can leave the lid off with a light above it to kind of let some of that moisture evaporate, and the light shining on it will keep the worms inside. They'll want to be burrowing in the bedding. Again, another thing, that if it's too wet, you can cut back on your food scraps that have the high water content, and that'll help dry it out a little bit more. If it's too dry, you can simply spritz with water with a spray bottle, or you can be adding your high water content foods. And then another issue that could possibly happen, maybe you're noticing a lot of dead worms. Like I said, you shouldn't be noticing a lot of dead worms. They can decompose very quickly. So if you're seeing them in there, that means that the bin conditions aren't right. And that can also cause the worms to literally run away. They will crawl out of the bin if they don't like it in there. So this could mean that the temperatures are either too high or too low. Maybe you added some citrus food or some garlic or something that is making their skin uncomfortable, and they want to leave because they don't like it. Um, can you blame them? So something to help, you would want to correct whatever. Just evaluate what's going on in your bin, and correct whatever is off. Bring it in, bring the bin inside. Maybe it's outside and it's 100 degrees out and they're leaving because they're too hot. You would want to like cool them off. You can add some ice in there. And you can shine a bright light above the bin, and that will help keep them from running away because they won't want to be exposed to the light. All right, so I wanted to leave you with some resources. There's this excellent book called Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff and Joanne Oslewski. It answers pretty much every question you could ever have about vermicomposting. Rutgers also has this excellent fact sheet called Vermicomposting. And New York City Compost Project has this nice brochure called Indoor Composting with a Worm Bin. So I can send them over to maybe I can send these over to Mona, who could share them with you, or we'll figure out how to get these resources to you if you'd like them. And so that's it. Now you know. We covered what you need to make your worm bin, how to solve some problems that might occur, and what to do with your worm castings. So this is my contact information. Like I said, I'm the environmental program coordinator. One of my programs is the Rutgers Master Gardener Helpline. So I'm leaving that information for you as well if you have any gardening questions, or as you're getting started with your vermicomposting, please feel free to reach out either directly to me or to the Master Gardener Helpline. We would be happy to help you.